Sorry, Chewy, I won't do that again.
You're right. I thought you were going well.
This is why we don't do live. So.
And again.
And again.
Good evening and welcome to the Joust. My name is Nagy. I'm here as always with my co-host Liam McNeil. But Jousters, we have a special guest for you this week. Last week we spoke about unsung heroes, and I think we have one for you this week. This man was a foundation player, first point scorer for the Knights in that 1988 season. He went on to fill various coaching and administration roles with the club, culminating in the chairman role in the late 2000s. And in 2014, he was awarded a life membership to the Newcastle Knights. It gives me great pleasure to welcome Robbie Tew to the Joust. Welcome, mate.
Thanks very much, Scott. Thanks, Liam.
Pleasure to have you on. Thanks for coming in.
Pleasure to be here.
You started your career in the Brisbane Rugby League. You played, I think, for Ipswich and Redcliffe before coming down to the Knights. How was the step up from the Brisbane Rugby League to the big Sydney comp, the New South Wales Rugby League?
No, it was tall. But my background's Ipswich, then Toowoomba, then Brisbane, then Newcastle.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's a hell of a journey around, eh?
I grew up in Gatton, which is in the Ipswich Rugby League, and then when I left school, I went to Toowoomba, which is a different division. And then when I left Toowoomba, I went to Redcliffe, and then from Redcliffe, I was approached by the Knights to come down here for their first year.
Because they seem to recruit that first team a lot of kind of avenues that a lot of other clubs didn't have to. You know, they went to Queensland, they went to New Zealand, and, you know, got a lot of guys who weren't in traditional pathways, not juniors and stuff.
Well, I think that's something that's not spoken about enough, because if you go and have a look back at what Alan McMahon and David Waite and Alan Bell and Rob Finch, the foundation coaches of the club, did at that time. John Lort was the foundation manager, and John did some of the tripping around the countryside and meeting the future players. When they recruited, because they had very little funds available to them, they recruited as best they could rough diamonds and opportunities. So at the end of the day, they were successful to the extent that I think if you go back through that 88, 89 year, you'll see that there's probably a core group of 7 or 8 players in there that played over 100 games for the club. Now, to do that by recruiting what were ostensibly a mix of Bush League footballers, really young potential first graders, and some that had just tipped into first grade, it was a credit to those coaches that they were able to spot that talent that early.
When you made your move to Newcastle, did you see yourself, being here as more of a long-term thing, or was it coming from Ipswich? Was it like here we go, this is it? This is a place I can really settle into?
No, when I signed a 2-year contract to come down, and my dad, who was alive at the time, he was here, I think just before he left to go overseas for the war, and when I signed, he said there's plenty of drive in that area, but it's not very clean. And when I came down, it was not like that. It was
Yep.
I didn't realise it was such a beautiful place, but I did only expect, my wife and I came down, and we did only expect to be here for 2 years. But it's 31 years later.
It's funny, Newcastle has that effect on people.
That's it. Even when you try to get away from the place, it draws you back in. It's you said yourself earlier this evening how your playing career with the Knights was 5 minutes. I think along 7 games. I think was. What happened with the 7? You obviously signed for 2 years, and where was the bumps in the road?
Oh, well, for me, not playing well is a primary one. And then I got ill. I got ill partway through the first season. I got a major organ disease, and anyway, got over that, but lost my motivation, I think, and wasn't playing well. And, you know, to the coaching staff's credit, I got probably, as I was saying to you earlier, I got the best tap on the shoulder you could get, which was effectively, have you ever thought of coaching, which means you're not going to get another contract.
We must have had an impression of the club for them to want to keep you around after for that period. But so you were coaching into the 90s now.
Yep.
Whereabouts were you coaching for? Which grades?
No, initially the jersey flag in those days was under 19. So yep. I had the under 19s for 1990 and 1991, and then I had 3 years with the 21. So we had. I was really fortunate. We had a fantastic group of juniors.
I was going to say, right around that era in 19s and 21s, there would have been some names coming through who we know and love well. Was there any particular standouts from that time coaching?
Oh yeah, there was stacks of them. Like my first under 19 team, we had Adam Muir and Matthew Johns that went a long way. We had blokes like Damien Driscoll that played many years at NRL level. Fellas like Kyle Emmerton that was a country footballer of note for many years, and then the under 21 window, you know, fellas like the Komali Brothers. Andrew Johns came through at that point in time, and blokes like Rob Ross, Tim Madison, Troy Fletcher. There's a lot of them, and they're all very good footballers.
Yeah.
So it was, you know, the most important thing I think from coaching them was to try and keep them in a particular direction and get out of their road.
Behaved?
Yeah, right.
Was that trying to get them behaved? Was that all?
No, they're all right. They're all pretty good with me.
That's the mate. I always forget that the Komali Brothers, started their career in Newcastle.
Yeah.
It was Brett and
Craig, I believe, was
Komali.
the halfback for Hunter Mariners.
Hunter Mariners in '96, I think. Was
Oh,
it?
97.
and Brett was as well.
He was too,
And
yeah.
Craig went to East.
Yeah.
Brett, I think, went to Melbourne. But I'll give you an example of the depth of talent in the juniors in those days. So at one point at the club, I think it might have been 92 or 93, the club had Matthew and Andrew Johns, Matthew Rodwell, Mick Hagan, the two Komalis, and Paul Scovgard and Frank Barrett were halves in the club, and Tony Kemp. So at the end of the day, there was to fill 6 half 5/8 positions or 3 grades of. We had about 9 players, all of whom had really long careers, many of whom played for their state, and 2 or 3 of which played for their country.
So how much credit do you take for that?
No, it was. I just look at it on the basis I was really lucky to be hanging around.
Mate, you're a better man than I would. I'd be hanging my coattails off that all the time.
No. That's, as I say to you, with the calibre of those young fellas coming through, the best thing you could do was point them in a direction and try and stay out of their road. Don't try and overcomplicate it.
Now, at in the middle of the '90s, where you could say the Knights' first grade side started really finding some form and pushing those top teams around, and you actually went to England and you took an invite over there to do more coaching. Was that right? Yeah.
Well, when I think in 93 or 94, John Dorey came here as an assistant coach. It might have been 92, 93, 94. Anyway, at about that time, David Waite ascended to the first grade coaching position here, and a little known, or maybe a forgotten fact from that period, which I think is a credit that the Knights don't get recognised enough for. In those early days, if you go back in the history of the NRL, you'll see that in '92, the Newcastle Knights and Brisbane Broncos, who won in '92, the Newcastle Knights first grade team played in the semis in '92 for the first year, but they tied for the club championship.
Yeah, right.
Oh, wow.
And if you think about it, in those days, the Broncos were as they are today. They were the most well-funded club in the league, and the Knights were very much battlers. But the ability to develop players was obvious here as an outstanding, prospect that the club had for the future, and to get to the point within 4 years of being able to tie in the club championships with Brisbane is a pretty significant thing.
Wow,
absolutely. Yeah. When you returned back to Australia from England, and then you found yourself back in the Knights' involvement, was that always a conscious choice coming back and thinking I'll be back there, or did you just end up think, oh well, this is another opportunity for me here and I'm going to make the most of it?
No, I came home from England. I had 3 years in England with Warrington and Workington, and then our eldest girl was about to start high school, so we came home, and I had no intention of going back into rugby league, other than as a supporter. Because we came home and we started a valuation business here at the time, and but a friend of mine, John Lort, and another ex foundation player in Stephen Crow had done some work in developing a regular reunion from about, I think maybe 97 was the first year, and John asked me if I'd get involved to develop and incorporate an old boys club. So there was I think about 8 of us foundation committeemen on that old boys club, and it's been terrific, since. So I was on I was on that from 1999, I think, to and I think we incorporated in 2004, and then right up until 2008 when I was asked if I'd run for the board.
Yeah, well, considering you weren't, you didn't think you would get back involved with rugby league, and then to start the now very prominent Knights Old Boys Club, which is we've had many of the old boys on, and it seems like such an institution now that everyone's very proud to be a part of. Once a night, I think they call it these.
Yeah, once a night.
Once a night, and but then you end up chairman of the club. Now that's a huge step from thinking that you might be just there as a supporter, and then suddenly you're chairman. How did that come about?
Well, that's a complicated story. So in late 2007, the Old Boys Committee believed that it would be of assistance to the club if somebody from the Old Boys Committee was to ascend onto the board for the Knights, and we actually nominated a gentleman who I won't name at the end of the day, because what occurred was there was an event took place within the Knights Club at the time which dictated that gentleman couldn't necessarily ascend to the board,
right? Okay.
or attempt to, because he had a conflict of interest.
Gotcha.
Oh.
Okay. Yeah.
And it was unfortunate, because I think he would have been outstanding, and later on he did get involved at my request, which was fantastic.
That's good.
But because he couldn't, I was asked if I would, and I deliberated on it for a while. Believe me, because we were in the I think we'd been operating in our own business for about only 8 or 9 years at that point in time, and we were still growing. So at the end of the day, I understood the amount of time it was going to take, but also it was pleasing to be asked, and at the end of the day, I said yes.
Was this one a bit of a tap on the shoulder as well? Are you getting sore shoulders from getting tapped on?
No, well that came later, because when the vote took place, I was actually in South Africa.
Oh, right. So the grand final, you're in England, and then the vote takes place, you're in South Africa.
Yeah, I was in South Africa on a bit of a jaunt, and so I got elected onto the board. And at that point in time, I was asked by telephone if I would stand for the chairmanship, and the then elected members of the board agreed to put that chairman's vote off until for 3 days, which is quite unusual. But at the end of the day, they agreed to do that, which would allow me to arrive home from my jaunt.
Yeah, very good.
Wow.
Well, you must have been the favourite for the position.
Well, it was a bit of a shock, because I hadn't told my wife about it. And the day I arrived home on the plane, somebody had let something go into the press, and one of the reporters here put it on the front page of the Newcastle Herald.
Oh, wow.
So when I got picked up at the airport and I was brought back by my wife, the 2 hours on the motorway were a bit of a grilling.
Just, honey, I have something to tell you. And she said, I've already read it in the papers. It's everything was explained.
But it was good.
What year was that when you were chairman?
2008.
2008. And these were, I was speaking to Liam earlier about, these were tricky years for the club. I think, there was some changes with coaching. I think Mick Hagan went to Parramatta, Brian Smith came, I think it might have been 07. But, Andrew Johns retiring in 07, Danny moving on to England, Danny Bittersweet, and it was a new face for the club, I think, in on the field as well as off the field, and a tricky time. I think you said it was a tricky job being chairman, and there was some hurdles there.
When Brian Smith was coach, and Brian's a good coach, a very good coach. I think Danny was still here for 2008, and
yep.
I think he might have gone to England in 09,
that might be right,
maybe
yeah.
10. And the club, the team there was a lot of new faces in it, as I recall. I think Brian had a bit of a broom through it in late 2007. But what he brought in was suitable to his purposes and his game plan. And I think in 07, I think they just avoided last. I think they won the final game and leapfrogged the second last team.
Yeah, that rings a bell. Yeah.
So then in 2008, I think from memory they finished just out of the 8, and then in 9 they were in the 8, and then 10 missed again, and then in 11, I think they were back in the 8.
Finished 8th, I think, in 11. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's, so it was around that time. There was a lot going on, both on and off the field, and around that time in 2010 and into 2011, there was lots of talk about private ownership of the club, which is something that was very new to the Knights and an option I think a lot of people hadn't considered before, with the rumours and talks around Nathan Tinkler taking over the club. And with the private, knowing now, obviously, hindsight's a beautiful thing, and but knowing now that that wasn't a sustainable option. But yourself was, it's been recorded that yourself was a bit sceptical of the deal early on. Was there anything that threw up a few flags?
Well, in late 2010, I was asked, our CEO, Steve Burriston, asked me if I'd come and meet Nathan in regards to whether or not Nathan had just, by the way, it was public knowledge that Nathan had just agreed a deal with the Soccer Federation.
Buying the Jets, wasn't he?
To take over the Jets. And he'd rung Steve, and as I understand it, he'd rung Steve and put it to Steve that it might be a good synergy, that if there was an opportunity there, that he might privatise the Knights. So Steve rang me and asked me if I'd come and meet with Nathan, which I did. And I said I'd take it back to our board and we'd discuss it, which we did. And then that might have been September or October 2010. And then within a relatively short period of time, we met again. And at that second meeting, quite ironically, as it turned out, I recorded a whole, on behalf of the board, I recorded a whole series of critical matters that needed to be further documented, but which were, the framework of a reasonable agreement in the event it was to be a privatisation process, and our members were to agree to it. So that if you like, the commercial structure of how that might take place, including guarantees, was discussed at that October meeting, and I recorded it all, and then I emailed it as a confirmation after I got home from the meeting to Nathan, and Nathan objected to quite a few of the things that were in the email, which I thought was a bit odd considering that we'd actually discussed it. So my ears pricked up at that point in time.
Right. There was at the time, I remember reading in the papers, $100 million deal. And I think to a lot of Knights supporters that were always thinking that the Knights really wanted that marquee player again. They really wanted to have the club be really well funded and a really drawable place. And having $100 million deal, which was splashed all over the Herald and Telegraph and things like that. But you were recorded to say that $100 million was more of a mirage. Was that the funding? Was it just a bit of a tagline? $100 million deal?
Well, what it was is, I think as it was first promoted into the media, and I didn't promote it into the media. Okay, a representative of the Tinkler Group did, and I don't know who that was. To this day, I have my suspicions, but at the end of the day, it was, because I received a call from the Newcastle Herald, and the representation to me was by the reporter that the question was, have you just knocked back $10 million for the Knights? And I said, no, as a matter of fact, I haven't. And then the front page of the Herald the following day said, Tew, words to the effect that Tew knocks back $100 million, which is a 10-year deal at $10 million a year. And when you got into the article, what the article actually said, I think from memory, was words to the effect that the Tinkler Group offers up to $10 million for the Knights. Now, up to and $10 million are two different things.
Yes.
That's something I remember hearing at the time. It was always up to this amount, up to that amount. It was never, this is the amount. It was always up to.
So it could have been $2 million or it could have been 10,
Yeah.
So suddenly those at the end of 10 years, those reaching 100 million would be very tricky.
But the important thing is that, as everybody knows now, because the circumstances at the Newcastle Knights have been well publicised, it's a very expensive operation to run an NRL club. and to their credit at the time, the Tinkler Group put forward a proposal which was the best proposal on commercial grounds that was available at the time, and the membership were willing to go down that path. Now, had the Tinkler Group lived up to the proposal and fulfilled it, it would have been an outstanding outcome. But unfortunately, they didn't.
How'd you deal with the pressure of having everyone involved with the club, supporters, and anyone really wanting this deal to go through and go through quickly, and having yourself being almost the last the last signature needed before anything could move forward? Did you feel any social pressure? Was there anyone from friends or even the papers? Seeing yourself in the paper most days would have been a bit of a change, I imagine.
Well, that's not a good thing at the best of times. Look, the irony, as I said earlier, was that the October meeting where a lot of the high-level commercial structure was discussed and documented, it finished up being very much the deal that was written down and signed off in the March of 2011.
Sorry,
right?
Could you just put the mic a little bit closer to your face? Yeah, there we go. Thank you.
It finished up being largely the structure of the deal that was agreed by members and signed off in March of 2011. But it took many, many months to get there. And then when the members made that decision in March of 2011, it then took till August to complete the transaction from the financial consideration and the guarantees being in place. So effectively, from the moment the story was put into the public domain in October of 2010 to signing off in August of 2011, I've got a great little business and I've got great staff, and they did a mighty job because I was very seldom at work, and things that were disappointing through that were that there was a inclination to consider that I was on the payroll, but it wasn't. I mean, as everybody knows, directors and the chairman are voluntary positions. You don't get paid for anything.
Yeah.
So that it was a lot of time, and it was difficult. And in terms of the impact from a personal point of view, I'm relatively immune to criticism unless it's from somebody who I respect and who I know, and other than that I don't really, everybody's entitled to their opinion and it doesn't really bother me that much. But your family does cop it a bit, and what you see in your family is that you see the personalities in your family who suffer from that, and those who probably a bit like me don't really mind.
Water off a duck's back.
Yeah.
So in the end of the deal included these guarantees, which some people might have forgotten about, but it was originally, I think, the first 2 years, 20 million as a bank guarantee. Could you just explain what a bank guarantee is, different to someone just saying that they'll pay the money? So
well, it's a guarantee held by a bank, and banks require, at that point in time, that that guarantee have cash behind it.
Yeah, right. So it's liquid funds right there, ready to go. And so after the first few years, I think it went down to 10.3. Was that correct?
So the stipulation was for the first 2 years the guarantee would hold at 20 million, and then from year 3 on, it would be 10 million growing at CPI per annum.
Right. For
the life of the deal.
When the Tinkler, we'll call it the Tinkler era, the Hunter Sports Group, when that started to dissolve and fall away and people started to lose faith in that and started to really look back on the time when you were making this deal, was it at all bittersweet to think like that you were like glad you put so much time in for that and to make sure these things were in place, so it didn't just collapse on itself? Look,
I think at the time it was going on, there was, and I can understand this because I've been here since the club began, so I understand as well as anybody how difficult it is without funds to try and compete at that NRL level. So when our supporters and the community in Newcastle saw this prospect on the horizon. I can understand why everybody was so keen to get the deal done in a hurry.
Yeah, I remember declaring Nathan Tinkler a future mayor of this city. I don't think I jumped the gun.
A lot of people did. A lot of people thought this was...
and that's understandable. And I can appreciate it, because at the end of the day, it's it would have been fantastic had the promises been fulfilled. But at the end of the day, what had to happen was there had to be an appropriate commercial structure put in place, and those things don't happen quickly. And there's a bit of argy-bargy involved in that, no matter what deal you're trying to nut out. You know, you can't negotiate a car with your next door neighbour without having a bit of pushback.
That's true. Yeah.
So at the end of the day, that takes time, and that time that it took was appropriate. And then the final extension on that time was that there was requirements for those guarantees to be put in place. So wherever that was going to be done, or whoever was doing that, whatever bank was doing that and holding it, they had their requirements of how that structure had to take place. So the Tinkler Sports Group had to deal with that. So those things in themselves take time. When you move, 2.5 or whatever it took, 3 years down the track, and you look back at what occurred then, and then what was in place, well, at the end of the day, I still had to operate in a business in this town. I think we've got a pretty good reputation in this town in the business that I'm in, and I'd like to think I've got a good reputation in this town, and I would hate to have thought that for the sake of rushing for a couple of weeks that we didn't do the right thing, because, as you can see, you guys your podcast is another example of how important the club is to the community. It's an icon here.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
it's seen as a community asset.
It really is. It means a lot to a lot of people that we come across. But speaking to Kirk Gidley, I think it was 2017 when we spoke to him.
Early 17 it was.
Early 17 when we spoke to him, and he spoke very highly of that whole era and the work that you did in making sure that the I's were dotted and the T's were crossed, and there was something in place in case of the worst case scenario. And I think he was even on Fox Sports and said something similar and named you in that time. After the deal was done, you stepped down as chairman, and after the NRL took ownership back of the Knights, you were awarded a life membership with the Knights with Mark Sargent. How was that after having a very diverse experience with the club as a player, coach, and administration role, to have the highest honour that the club can give you? How was that?
I thought it was terrific. I mean, it was very humbling, and to be with Mark. I mean, Mark came back in '89, and he was our first Australian rep, and he was our first Rothmans medalist, I think. So it was very humbling for me, and it was lovely, and I'll always look back on it on the basis that it was something. Let me tell you.
I can only imagine. It must be great now to see, after especially quite a few years of the Knights having a lot of challenges on the field, and then now reaching a point of we've hit a bloody good run of form. Let's just say that, and 6 wins on the trot, middle of the season. I'm not sure if that's been done in the last decade, even around the Johns era, which it's a special time. Is it nice to see? Do you still keep up with the games and watch the boys and head down and whatnot? Is it nice to see, obviously, the stadium full of fans and the club prospering under the West Group?
Yeah, it is, and it's it's easy to say that's foreseeable, but the bottom line is that the group behind the club now is financial. It's well run. It's got an extraordinary history of being well run. It's rugby league based, and really is community based. They've got an enormous what would you call they've got an enormous internal membership, and how they professionally apply themselves in the NRL level is, I think, being observed by the average fan in the Hunter. So there's a greater attention being paid to that, which means greater membership for the Knights component of West Group, and the game day experience. You can have all the dancing parties you like, you can have all the bands playing you like, but the game day experience has a buzz about it when your football team's performing, and it doesn't matter how you trick all that up. Even though today that you probably do need to trick it up a bit, but it doesn't matter how you trick all that up. When your team is performing, the game day has a buzz.
It does, doesn't it? There's nothing better.
It's nothing quite like it. I think I was so unfortunate to miss the recent win over the Roosters. You know, the classic, the working town knocking one over on the Sydney boys, and in front of 26,000 people. And I'm really excited for hopefully some more prosperous eras of the Newcastle Knights. We're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back to talk about the Knights Storm game. Thanks, guys.
That was excellent.
That was fantastic.
I love this rugby.
Welcome back to the second half of the Joust. It was so nice having Chewy on, and we even just got stuck in another conversation as he was running out the door. It was such a pleasure to have Newcastle's very own White Knight.
Yes, and fantastic to share a 262 with a Newcastle legend.
I know. Well, he said that. He goes, I got to be off, but first I'm going to make sure I finish the can of Murray's 262 Nova Castro Brew. That's just the kind of whole. We thought it was our conversation keeping in here, but really it was just the delicious beer.
It was the Murrays. Thank you, Murrays.
Thank you very much, Murrays, for keeping all our guests here just a little bit longer. Now, Liam, it was not the result that we wanted against Melbourne on the weekend.
Nagy, it wasn't. But look, the streak had to end at some point, and it's just a shame that the streak ended not with a roar but with a whimper. It kind of went down without any fight whatsoever.
If you I'll take you back quickly, just to when we were approaching these three games against Roosters, Souths, and Melbourne, and I said I'd be happy if we won one out of those three. And then after we won the second one, I was like, we've got to go three in a row. we have to. These are the big three. This is basically our semi-final that we've never faced. It was disappointing to see the way they went down. Outplayed, outmustered, outmatched, I think.
Outmustered.
Mustard?
Outmuscled.
Well, no. They had more mustard than we did.
And we didn't cut the mustard.
No,
look, it was a pretty terrible effort. Lots of errors. We only completed at 58%, which you can't do against Melbourne. You do that against any side in the competition, they're going to beat you. But you do it against Melbourne, who are, consummate professionals, and they're going to put a score on you. So, what was it, 34-4 it finished up?
It was a lesson in football.
It was a lesson in rugby league. Yeah. You're exactly right. A lesson in rugby league. They were just too strong all over the park.
I don't think they ever really released their grip on the game. It was good to see that, we could have got a second try with, we obviously got the first one, didn't convert. We could have got the second, and it was knocked out of the hands. But it was never looked like, we're back in this. We're turning the tide, because we couldn't build any pressure.
Couldn't build any pressure, no, not at all.
And without that pressure and the go forward, Ponga didn't have any room to move, and Pearce was put under a great deal. Connor Watson, probably our best performer, and that's probably a hats off for this week, Connor Watson.
Yeah. Just really showed how much we missed David Clemmer, though, the lack of go forward there.
Yeah, it was disappointing. I was hoping that Dan Saff would have a bigger game, but I think everyone was just frustrated out of their regular game. We couldn't build any momentum. But yeah, Connor running, a still strong running game, tackle breaks, and over 50 tackles, 58 tackles or something.
Wow.
So absolute insanity of an effort from Connor Watson. He's really shaping up. I thought that's where he would struggle as a position. And
that's it. He doesn't strike you as that traditional hooker making 50 tackles, just focusing on his service. When you incorporate a running game into that, obviously it's much harder if you're making that many tackles, because you start to fatigue early. But he seems to have taken that well in his stride, and he seems to be really not filling it. He's gone beyond filling in now. He's kind of starting to thrive in that number 9 jersey.
He's playing a very different game to Danny Levi, I think, and it's exciting. I think it's some people have already come out and said he's Cook 2.0.
Ooh,
so
I like that.
Yeah, so I think we're going to run with that for a while.
Yeah, sounds good.
So on your Cookie 2.0. What else have we got? Is it obviously a huge game coming up this weekend on a Sunday. Rep round,
yes.
And I completely forgot that it was rep round. Then I started seeing all these other team listings, and I thought they were fantasy team listings. Like, if I was going to name a Samoan side next week, this would be my Samoan side.
Nagy forgot that rep round exists.
I forgot. Well, I was so focused on Origin on the Sunday.
It's easy to forget when you're so focused on Origin that there is a full weekend's feast of rugby league happening.
Yeah. It's like a degustation of rugby league, and look, William, I'm just going to throw. What did you think of the selection of the New South Wales Blues side?
I don't know what to think. Nagy, Brad Fittler obviously has made 7 changes to a team that only lost by 4 points, and it seemed fairly comprehensively outplayed, though. So that's what you do when you're comprehensively outplayed. You make changes, but has he made the right changes? I don't know. But he's definitely made them. He's certainly gone ahead and made them.
Congratulations to Dan Safidi, obviously making his Origin debut and also starting So well done, Dan Safidi, for that. Look, he's a huge Fiji, and really give it up for Dan Safidi. So it's an exciting thing for Big Dan Saf. And
Absolutely, and to be thrown into the cauldron of Origin in a must-win game too. I think that shows a lot of faith from Brad Fittler in him. I think Brad Fittler's really believes in him and believes in what he can do. And I'll tell you what, I just hope he's got David Clemmer along for the ride to really rev up Dan. And because I think we've definitely seen the best of Dan Safidi when he's around David Clemmer.
Maybe Clemmer could run the waters. Maybe
Clemmer could run the waters. He could run anything. He could do it all. But we'll quickly name the State of Origin team and highlight those changes. Obviously, we've got James Tedesco at fullback, Blake Ferguson and Josh Addo-Carr on the wings, Tom Trbojevic and Jack Whiten in the centres, which Nagy are making a face.
Neither of them are centres.
They don't play centre at their club side, do they?
No.
James Maloney has been recalled, along with Nathan Cleary in the halves. Then we've got Daniel Safidi, Paul Vaughan in the front row, Damien Cook at hooker, Boyd Cordner and Tyson Frizzell retain their spots in the second row, and Jake Trbojevic starts at lock. And
now,
this bench,
interesting bench, Liam.
interesting bench. 4 back rowers: Dale Finucane, Tarek Sims, Cameron Murray, and Wade Graham.
They're all, besides Wade Graham, they're all on the bigger side of back rowers. You could say that Tarek Sims could play prop, but he doesn't. They all play on the edge. I don't know how much time these players are going to get or where they're going to put them in, or show us, Freddie. Show us what you're going to do.
It's a real Origin mystery, this side. I'm equal parts intrigued and worried. I've never really been this intrigued and worried about a team at the same time. But I
suppose if they win the game, then it comes down to game 3 and we're all praising him, saying he's made masterful decisions.
Yeah. It'll all depend on the result on Sunday. And what do we got, Nagy?
I think time to open your sack, Liam.
Oh, yes. Just before we go to the sack, congratulations to James Gavay, Herman Essie, Heimel Hunt, and Mason Lino, who were all named in the Toa Samoa side as well.
On your Toy Samoans.
All right. Now, from the sack, first of all, Sean Lazenby. The bye seemed to have a positive effect in our win against the Bunnies after going into the bye with a win. Do you think it will have the same effect against the Broncos at home after going into the bye or rep round with a loss?
Yeah, I think coming off the bye is a bit of a clean slate. I feel like it's a bit of a wipe. If you're coming in with energy and form, it's sort of hard to find that again sometimes. And then if you're having a form slump, sometimes the bye is like, oh, thank God. I think the guys, it's a great, we got beaten up in that game against the Storm. I think the bye is a perfect time. And also all the players that you mentioned playing for the Samoans and players like Clemmer, Glasby, Ponga, they'll come back with, I think, a lot of confidence from playing all representative football.
Yeah, I feel like rep round's really going to rejuvenate some of the players in the squad, and it's right around that time of the year when you need a bit of rejuvenation. You need them to go out and do something a little bit different. They've started to fall into some patterns, which admittedly up till the Melbourne game were good winning patterns and good winning habits. But, I think they've started to form some habits which, in the long term, you want to avoid doing that. You want to stay dynamic and change things up. So I think the change of scenery for the week will be good for all those players. And for the other guys, it's just, a nice time to rest some niggles, rest some injuries, and just get back up to 100%, which they didn't look like they were in the Melbourne game. So
I'm very happy that Pearce wasn't selected for the Blues. Can I just say, I know it's going back, but it's like, if he was, you'd put him under a lot of pressure. The spotlight would be right on him. Then if they win, they're like, well, he must be selected for game 3, and then we lose him again. Now it's like, let Blues do their thing. Let him focus on playing well for the Knights.
Let's have Newcastle Mitchell.
Yes.
Not New South Wales Mitchell. Let's have Newcastle Mitchell. He's ours now, and we want him. All right. Now, that leads into our next question from Paul Azapati. Is Mitchell Pearce really hurt, or did he just not want to play Origin?
Oh, well, you could have said the same thing in game 1. I don't think it happens. I don't think people feign injuries, but I think people are probably pretty good at. Mitchell Pearce is probably someone that's carrying an injury all the time.
That's it. When you get to that age, he's 30 now, which is a long time in NRL years. He's been in the NRL since he was 18.
Yeah.
And at that age, you're pretty much always carrying an injury. And I know the injury for him is hip flexor or groin cork and hip flexor tightness, which is just an ongoing injury that he's been managing throughout the year. I've noticed he's been strapping up there. I keep an eye around Mitchell Pearce's
groin.
His bottom groin, of course, not his shoulder groin.
Not his shoulder groin.
The bottom groin.
Because you got your 2 shoulder groins.
Yeah, you got your 2 shoulder groins and your bottom groin. But I've been paying attention to the bottom groin, and he's had them strapped up pretty heavily. So I think it's a genuine injury, and
I think it's inarguable that it's a genuine injury, and it's a huge step up to play Origin. I think you'd have to be 100%, and in a position knowing that Queensland could win the series. So you're not just going to say, oh, yeah, I'm about 50-50.
Yeah.
So throw me in, coach.
Yeah. Now, Daniel Turner asks, will DSAF thrive in Origin, or has Freddie thrown him in too early, a la Mullen?
He plays well for Fiji. He steps it up then. I hope he can do the same in the Blues. He's got a great opportunity. Also, I hope he doesn't play too well because then other clubs will want to buy him. So,
yeah, good point. That's a fair point. I think it's the old Origin adage: if you're good enough, you're old enough. You know. And I think Daniel Safidi's ready. He had, like you said, he's played for Fiji. He hasn't played any higher level finals footy for the Knights or anything, but he's shown that he's a performer.
There's something about Fijians, especially. When you've got a 22, 23-year-old Fijian, they're just built differently.
Bigger.
They're bigger, they're stronger. I don't know what they do out in those islands of Fiji. What the water's like out there.
Beautiful and crystal.
It must be.
Well, they have their very famous water brand, Fiji Water.
Fiji Water.
So,
they're all drinking that over there, all in the bottles, and it's. But I bet they're built like machines, and I think he can match it with any prop in the game. So hopefully he can go out there and just lock horns with, one of the other Queensland forwards and really just put a big dent in their side.
But I think the other thing that suits him well is that front rower won't come away from a game with the criticism of a half like Jared Mullen. So even if he doesn't have the best game, you won't see him kind of lambasted and thrown away from Origin for good like they did with Mullen. He'll be just a front rower who had a quiet game, and then
tell that story to Ryan O'Hara.
Right. Oh God. Good point.
2004 game 1.
Oh, you've blown my whole argument wide open, Nagy. But no, I don't think he's been thrown in too early, and I think he's going to do a job.
He'll do the boys' prep.
Yeah. Now Shane Avenell, something we forgot to mention in the news. Mitch Barnett has been sidelined for 3 games for a crusher tackle. Shane Avenell asks, "What do you guys think of the Barnett tackle, and do you think it will affect the team?" I don't think it'll affect the team because you can just slot Aiden Guerra back in. He played 80 minutes in
Sione,
with Guerra to the bench potentially. Yeah. Aiden played 80 minutes at Canterbury Cup last week. So again, the beauty of having depth is that I don't think it'll affect the side too much.
I really like Barney, but gee, that was stupid.
It was, wasn't it? It was a brain explosion.
That's what you get with Barney. Barney's back. Look, the man has a tramp stamp across the lower half of his back, so he can make a mistake in his life and have deep regret about that. It's disappointing to see him do it. When I saw him, I just cringed and thought that's the last thing we want. And it's getting all of the attention about the judiciary this week. So 3 weeks, he can come back in with a level head, but he's a bit of a loose cannon anyway. But
he is.
That's just what we get.
But exactly. With a loose cannon like Barney, you're going to get that from time to time. It's the same that South fans say about Burgess. He'll get suspended every once in a while, but you've got to cop that. Dan Howard asks, what are your thoughts on potential Jaden Brayley signing? He doesn't like it because personally,
too many hookers.
With Watson firing and Levi's form, he thinks we could be spending the money elsewhere. I think we're pretty well blessed for hookers as well.
If you look at the Tigers right now, they have all these players that with a host of positions they can't fill. You've got all these players that are all playing, they're all in the same position. And it's like, why have you got them? And they're trying to offload them. That's what we're going to have with hookers. Hookers can only play one position, and there's hooker, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think...
So you don't buy Danny Levi and go, oh, do you want to go into 5/8 this week? Or play on the wing? No,
the only reason I'd see them going with Brayley is if they do shop Danny Levi around, and as they seem to do every couple of months.
Yeah. Yeah, that seems to be just the natural thing.
Yeah.
What else we got, Liam?
That's it for the sack now. Just for the lower grades, last week reserve grade 1 against the Magpies, Western Suburbs, 16-12. And as I mentioned, Aiden Guerra played 80 minutes. Next game for the reserve grade is not till the 30th of June with the rep round off. Obviously, it's against Blacktown Sea Eagles. And Jersey Flegg last week got a win against the Tigers, 22-6. And their next away game is the Dragons. And they're in second position after 14 rounds. So good on the Jersey Flegg side.
On your Fleggers. Now, Liam, big game this Sunday on the Sabbath right after church.
Yes.
Where will you be watching the game?
I'll be watching it at the Commonwealth Hotel. Nagy, where will you be watching the game?
I will also be there at the Commonwealth Hotel, the only place to watch Sport on the Hunter. Please come and enjoy the game with us. We'll be there, in a very social capacity. No microphones. We're leaving the headphones at home because we think the game is so important that we need all of our attention focused purely on the screens and support. So it's going to be an exciting game. So please head down to the Commie and see you there. If you like the Joust, please like us on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, and I think I maybe...
Nailed it. SoundCloud. See, there's always one. All those social pipes. Liam, it's a pleasure to talk with you. It was a real pleasure to talk with Robbie Tew. It wasn't it fantastic?
And it was. I've been trying to get him on for weeks and weeks and weeks, and he finally spared some of his time.
The planets aligned perfectly.
Perfectly for this week. So, Jousters, we'll see you on Sunday, and then we'll see you again next week, the same time, same place, and
the same old talk.
Thanks, Liam. We'll catch you again.